When it comes to Russia, I wanted to ask you, Scott, you had some choice words for Antony Blinken. He was in France. He is, or at least he's, he's traveling at the moment. Recently spoke in France. This comes as you said, Russia's doing quite well right now in Ukraine. I believe Sergei Shoigu just reported out of Russia's defense ministry. He said that 80,000 Ukrainian troops have been deposed of since the beginning of this year. And meanwhile, you have Antony Blinken talking about how strong NATO is. I'll play this and then I'll read what you had to say and just get your response to what exactly is happening right now for Russia in this conflict. You mentioned the Crocus attack, the investigation that's ongoing. There's been a lot that's been going on, so maybe you can give an update, but let's listen to Antony Blinken first.
In Ukraine. It's weaker militarily, it's weaker economically, it's weaker diplomatically. Ukraine is more united than ever before. Europe has taken itself off of the dependence on Russian energy, and our NATO alliance is both stronger and now bigger in Ukraine. It's weaker militarily.
So there was that, and then Scott said George Orwell couldn't craft a finer example of doublespeak. Jerry Seinfeld likely would have had a hard time squeezing more opposites into an episode of Opposite Day. But this isn't fiction or comedy. This is the U.S. Secretary of State spouting delusional nonsense at a moment when clear-eyed realism is demanded. So, Scott, this comes amid the Crocus attack that occurred in Moscow, horrific terrorist attack you mentioned earlier. Investigations ongoing. Russia is demanding that the intelligence chief in Ukraine basically be given up because not just about this Crocus attack, which Russia believes Ukraine was heavily involved in, but also because of all of the attacks that Ukraine has committed on Russian soil, the terrorist attacks, Belgorod and many other places. Scott, what's going on in this conflict right now that we need to know?
Well, first of all, let's just go to Blinken for a second. I mean, everything he said is just the polar opposite of reality. Russia's stronger militarily today, right now, than they have been at any time in recent history. The Russian military is not only growing, it's well trained, and it's not just well trained in basic military knowledge. It's well trained in the most relevant combat derived experience. And we're talking about modern large scale combat, the kind of combat that Russia would be, facing if they had to take on NATO. Russia is, besides Ukraine, Russia is the only other military that has this kind of firsthand experience. Drone warfare, it's revolutionary. Russia has integrated drone warfare into every aspect of what it's doing. NATO hasn't. So the idea that Russia, and then the other thing they have to understand too is that Russia, stress tests their mobilization, and it's not just the 300,000 that were mobilized, but the fact that 1,500 Russians volunteer every day to serve in the special military operations. So these volunteers are received by the respective military districts, processed through the centers, given their equipment, given their training, organized into units, and then sent to the special military operation. This system had a lot of rust on it when Russia originally tried to do that. One of Russia's big advantages is that it can mobilize troops at a greater number than their European counterparts. And so if there ever was going to be a general conflict, that Russia has the potential of mobilizing troops faster. And all we've allowed that Russia to do now is perfect that system so that it's almost seamless. These troops come in, they have the warehouses full of the appropriate equipment. They now can take these guys, process them, organize them, train them, send them off. This is huge. If there was ever going to be a general war, Russia has expanded its military from 900,000 to 1.6 million. There's 2 new military districts, the Leningrad military districts. Thank you very much, Finland. You have to live with that one. The Moscow military district. Finland now has to, they didn't have 70,000 Russian troops on their borders. Now they do. Russian troops that are solely focused on fighting the Finns, defeating the Finns. And so now the Finns are going to be called upon to bankrupt themselves to build a military that they didn't need to build, but now they're going to have to build. It's just, Russia's stronger. Ukraine more unified. They didn't have a presidential election. Ukraine's not a democracy right now. It's a dictatorship, straight up dictatorship. Military, they're ruling, by, military decree, martial law. By not having a presidential election, we run into a situation that come, I think, May 20th. There's supposed to be an inauguration of a new president. There won't be. Russia said that everything changes at that point. Everything changes. How they view Zelensky, how they view the Ukrainian government changes. And what that may mean is that Russia has given a lot of assurances to people that they won't kill Zelensky as long as he's the president of Ukraine. According to Russia, he ain't going to be the president of Ukraine on May 21st. And Lavrov has sort of said, well, let's see what happens. When you got the senior diplomat making these kind of statements, it's a bad moment. And I think we're seeing that the Russian or the Ukrainian military is recognizing the total dysfunction and delusion of Zelensky. And there's now increasing talk about the potential of a military coup to remove Zelensky from power. How does this represent unity? It doesn't. Ukraine is a dysfunctional nation with a dysfunctional economy, a dysfunctional society, a dysfunctional military. So, this and there's nothing NATO can do. Yes, there's a lot of talk. At that same meeting, you had the French, foreign minister talk about how France was going to take the lead, that there were no red lines. They could put troops in. They could do. France can't do any of that. France has a military system that's capable. They were planning on expanding a 700-strong battalion-sized force in Romania to a brigade-sized force of 2,000. That was supposed to happen sometime next year. They've now talked about rushing that forward to make that happen this summer. And then the potential of expanding it up with an additional 12 to 20,000 French troops, but only if other nations commit to create a 60,000 strong, army-sized group or corps-sized group that would go in there and then could be transformed into a NATO force. That's the French plan. Russia's not going to let any of that happen. They're going to blow them up, kill them, compel NATO to make a decision. And Germany said, we ain't giving you Article 5. America said, you're not getting Article 5. So the French are now left with their bluff having been called. But France is talking about the need to be much more aggressive with Russia, but it's all talk. It's no action to this point because there's not much they can do. War is about logistics. How is France going to logistically sustain a 2,000 force, 12,000 force, 20,000 force in Ukraine when the moment they land in Ukraine, they start getting bombed? They don't have depots in there. Now, if they start supplying them from depots outside of Ukraine, and that logistical support turns into operational support, meaning aircraft are flying combat sorties from air bases in Romania. Those bases now get attacked, and now we have an expansion of the conflict, which the United States doesn't want. So I think that we have a situation where Tony Blinken, all you have to do is take the exact opposite of what he said, and that's the reality of the situation that NATO and Ukraine finds itself in. We're looking at, this is what strategic defeat looks like. And there's literally nothing that can happen. Even if they pass that aid bill today, it isn't going to change the bottom line. There's now talk that Russia has, they've destroyed Ukrainian air defense to the extent now that they're able to drop these glide bombs at will on targets, and they're mass producing them. They're starting to bring in these 3,000 pound, or I'm sorry, that's 3,000 kilogram bombs. That's like 6,000 pounds. And you start dropping these things on the Ukrainian positions, there's nothing left, and there's nothing to replace them. Holes will open up, and Russian forces will go in. Russia's expanded its force structure. Right now, you have, there was talk around 600, 700,000 Russian forces deployed in the Special Military Operations Zone. Russia's talking about building 2 new combined arms army, like right now, ready to deploy them. So you're probably taking this number up to, 800,000. They're going to have something called the Dnieper River Flotilla, another 20,000. So you're getting close to 900,000 with a surge capacity of 1 million men. 1 million men is what you're going to need if you want to go up to the Dnieper River line, secure it with a Dnieper River flotilla that you're building right now. Why are you building a Dnieper River flotilla if you don't plan on taking the Dnieper River? Because they're planning on taking the Dnieper River and holding the Dnieper River, and then redistributing those forces from a screen, backing up a screen, to creating 2 powerful strike packages reinforced by 2 new combined arms army that will have simultaneous ability to advance on Kharkov, advance on Odessa. And I think that's how the summer is breaking out. A strategic victory by Russia, absolute defeat by Ukraine, combined with what I think is probably going to be the demise of the Zelensky government, replaced by a government that understands reality and will sit down with the Russians and negotiate a termination of this conflict, where Russia owns Odessa, Kharkov, Mykolaiv, maybe Dnipropetrovsk. But the map of Ukraine will change forever, and so will the politics, because none of this pro-NATO nonsense will be allowed to survive in a post-conflict Ukraine. Blinken is, Ukraine will be NATO. No, it won't, ever. And if you continue to pretend that it's going to be, then there won't be any Ukraine. I mean, right now we're looking at a situation where Ukraine is going to lose almost 50% of its territory. But if this war continues at the behest of NATO, then Ukraine will lose 100% of its territory.
Yeah, and where does these terrorist attacks then fit in, Scott? Because, from the Crocus attack, which there's still information that, it's coming fast, the information that we do have regarding Ukraine's involvement. There's, of course, suspected US, possibly UK involvement. Then there is, of course, the ongoing attacks that are happening, whether it's Crimea or especially Belgorod, which has been hit, many, many times, even just in the last several weeks. Where does this all fit in terms of accelerating or not, or affecting this timeline for Russia? How will Russia respond to these attacks? Because the Crocus attack was a kind of a next level kind of attack, which implicates so many different forces, ones that you've talked about, from the network of these kind of like jihadists, terrorists, Ukraine. It kind of connects all of them together, from the Caucasus region, the Middle East, Ukraine. We're talking about a huge network. How does Russia respond to this?
Again, I don't speak for the Russian government. I know a lot of people think I do, but I don't. So I don't want to pretend that I have any special insight on this. But I would say that based upon past performance, Russia is objective oriented. They have 2 major strategic objectives: demilitarization, the destruction of the Ukrainian military, and denazification, that is to get rid of Banderist ideology, the current Ukrainian government that has empowered this. Linked to that are, certain assumptions that Ukraine will be neutral in perpetuity, that it will never be NATO. But these assumptions are shifting because, if this war continues without termination, there won't be a Ukraine. So we won't need to talk about that aspect of it at all. But the Russians are winning. They've shaped the battlefield to the point where they're achieving all of their objectives. This collapse, which has been ongoing since the fall of 2023, where the end of the so-called summer counteroffensive. What we saw there was Russia turned the corner on the war of attrition, and had achieved the moment when every day that followed, Ukraine got weaker and Russia got stronger, and that this balance will never change. Russia's getting stronger every day, Ukraine's getting weaker every day, and that will eventually lead to loss of total combat cohesiveness, collapse, etc. So that's the direction Russia's going. Ukraine knows this. Ukraine's desperate right now. This is why the French president is talking about sending in, French troops to replace some of the Ukrainian troops that are securing, for instance, the border with Belarus. So that, French troops are there. They're not in direct combat with Russians, but those troops that are there can now be brought down to plug the holes that are developing on the front lines. Ukraine's out of manpower. The other thing, Ukraine now, this was never, and this is, I think we have to look at this again strategically. This was never about Ukraine winning the war against Russia in terms of defeating the Russian military on the field of battle. This was never going to happen. Nobody really believed that this could happen because Russia's just too big, too powerful. But what they were hoping could happen is that Ukraine could inflict so much damage on the Russians, so much loss, that Russia was compelled to mobilize, compelled to radically change defense industry to respond, and in doing so, create domestic unrest, political unrest, which, when linked to the ever, hopeful West on sanctioning the Russian economy into oblivion. So if you have economic collapse combined with social distress, the strategic objective has always been to achieve the Moscow Maidan moment, a moment when the citizens of Russia would gather together, as what happened in Maidan in 2014, to overthrow the president. And so that's Ukraine's hope, is that, basically their job isn't to win right now, it's to survive long enough to create the conditions for a Moscow Maidan moment. And now we take a look at the Crocus terrorism. The purpose of the Crocus terrorist attack, Crocus City Hall terrorist attack, was to disrupt the Russian presidential elections. These attacks were originally planned to take place on March 9th, when Shaman, a very well-known Russian pop singer, patriotic singer, was giving a concert there. Several high-profile Russian officials were going to be in attendance, and so if they could launch the attack there, you could undermine confidence in Vladimir Putin, undermine confidence in the Russian state, and that would hopefully be reflected in polling numbers, where you get low voter turnout, maybe reduced numbers of support for Vladimir Putin. Because even though it was inevitable that Putin was going to win, one of the things that Vladimir Putin needed from this was a mandate for change, a mandate for decisive action. Because again, remember, he was hesitating in 2022 because he didn't know where the political wind was. He didn't know if Russia was capable of doing the steps necessary to stabilize the front line. So he was nervous. Now there's no doubt in his mind, the Russian people are solidly behind him. 77% of the eligible voters participated in this election. 88% of them voted for him. So he has the solid support of the Russian people. And so he can move forward decisively. So now you're the Ukrainians, and you take a look at this and you say, damn, what do we do? Well, they fall back. Remember, the Ukrainians aren't operating alone. The Ukrainians are operating from a playbook that's been written by the United States and British intelligence dating back to Cold War times. There was a guy, Richard Pipes. He was a Harvard scholar, and he was advising the Reagan administration during the 1980s on initiating actions that would cause the Soviet Union to break up from within, to empower national resistance, national awakening, especially in Central Asia. It was linked to a policy that began with Zbigniew Brzezinski, national security advisor to Jimmy Carter. I mean, a lot of people may not be familiar with this, but he got the Carter administration to support Islamic fundamentalists in Afghanistan for the purpose of triggering a Soviet response to create the conditions for what he called a Soviet Vietnam in Afghanistan. And so, this was part of the policy, was to create this Islamic nationalist movement in Afghanistan that would get the Soviet Union mired in, and then have that expand through the Central Asian republics of the Soviet Union, and create the conditions for the breakup of the Soviet Union. This was always a strategic plan. The CIA has always had people looking at that. And so now when you look at Russia today, one of the problems that Russia has is it's like what's happened in the United States, uncontrolled immigration. Russia makes extensive use of Central Asian workers in their construction industry. They use Central Asians, and they're sort of like the Latinos of for America. You know how when you check into a hotel anywhere you are in America, 8 out of 10 times the people that are turning down your bed, making your bed, doing the sort of hidden people that make hotels clean and function are Latinos, and many of them probably don't have appropriate documentation. How do you think we get the food and the vegetables, the fresh vegetables that appear in the middle of winter in our stores? They're picked by literal armies of Latino migrant workers. Again, many of them undocumented. Virtual slave labor, the way they're treated and abused throughout America. Russia has a similar problem. A big Central Asian community that when they come into cities like Moscow and St. Petersburg, aren't seeking to integrate into Russian society, but rather they remain segregated in their own little communities. And so one of the strategies that the CIA has had, and again, we'll talk about this from the perspective of an intelligence officer. When I was doing the UN weapons inspections in Iraq, I worked very closely with foreign intelligence services, including the Israelis, including the CIA, including MI6. All three of them made use of Kurdish population in Baghdad. Now, a large number of Kurds lived in Baghdad. Not every Kurd was anti-Saddam. There's a large number of Kurds that were pro-Saddam, and they lived in Baghdad. They were part of the Baghdad community. But within those Kurds, there were those who were anti-Saddam. And these are the guys that are the taxi drivers. These are the hotel operators. These are the restaurant owners. These are the guys that, provide a safe haven for anti-Saddam sentiment. And so I know, for instance, the Israelis had a giant ring, intelligence ring, agent ring, that operated based upon the taxis. And I was in a position where I didn't know exactly who they were, but I was able to read the dossiers of them, what access they had, and I could submit questions to them that they would then answer and come back about, where a certain site was, where people were, all related to, W&D activity. But there was this Kurdish element that was exploited by U.S. intelligence, by Israeli intelligence, by British intelligence. The British had the same thing. I was given the black book, literally black, because black and then the code name. So Black Prince, black this, black that, and open it up. And it gives you a description of who the various agents were and what they could know. And then what I would do is, write questions and say, what's this street look like? What's this building look like? What's on the second floor? What's the security? And you write all these questions out, and then it gets thrown through the British system until it gets in the hands of the people. They collect the information and it flows back, and then you get briefed on it. That same situation exists right now in Russia. The CIA has always sought to exploit ethnic minorities. And right now, for instance, in Moscow, there are Uzbek populations, Tajik populations, Kyrgyz populations that provide the similar safe haven. And so what the United States has been doing is seeking to recruit a support network amongst these communities that can provide emergency transportation capability, hotel capabilities, sustainment capabilities. And so you have this agent network there. And, the Ukrainians have tapped in on that. We know that the Ukrainian embassy in Tajikistan has been seeking to recruit Tajiks for this purpose. And as the Russians investigate the Crocus City Hall attack, what it appears to be going on, and the Russians have acknowledged this, is that this is an effort by Ukraine, and this is why Russia always talks about American and British hands. Yes, Ukraine is in the lead on this, but their masters are behind them, directing them, because this is what the United States has done all along. This is something we've prepared to do. The CIA has the existing networks. And so we're either letting the Ukrainians dovetail on our networks, or we're helping the Ukrainians recruit their own networks. And the purpose of these networks is to create ethnic divide. The Crocus City Hall attack was designed to outrage Russia to the point where they would turn on the Central Asian populations and create tremendous unrest. And then to have a situation where the Russian people blamed Vladimir Putin for allowing this situation to occur and diminish him in the eyes of others. So Russia has a political problem right now, because there are people in Russia right now who are saying that the immigrants have to go. And so, but if you overreact, then you have an economic problem. How do you replace them as workers? And you also have a political problem. Now you begin to disrupt Russia's relations with the former Central Asian republics at a critical time when Russia is trying to create a European or Eurasian economic union together with China, where you need good relations. So this is the strategic objective of the Ukrainians, of the CIA going.
Thank you for tuning in to my latest video. I appreciate all of your support. This channel, however, needs your help. I am seeking to make this channel more sustainable in the long term and upgrade necessary equipment to ensure that this work continues onward and makes progress to give you all of the geopolitical analysis that you all deserve. For that reason, I'm asking you to become a member of my Patreon community at patreon.com/DannyDhaiphong. You can find that link in the video description or in the pinned comment below. For whatever amount you choose to give, just know you are supporting independent media that you can't find anywhere else. Thank you so much, and I look forward to the next video.